Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gay with God podcast. I am Midge Noble, and I am so glad that you're here. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you who support and shares this podcast and talks about it to your friends and reposts it and does all the things that anybody would need to have done in order to get whatever we offer out into social media where other people can pick it up and learn more about the Gay with God podcast and also about their own faith journey, about their own coming out. I really appreciate that. I also want to remind you of the Wild Goose Festival that's coming up in July. I know ad nauseum every single time I remind you of this. And I do it for two reasons. One, because I'm so excited that I have found this community because it is a community grounded in faith-inspired social justice. So when we talk about why are we here, what are we doing here, how do we fit into the big picture? Well, the big picture includes all of us, and so it's a one-of-a-kind gathering that brings together activists, artists, seekers, musicians, speakers, podcasters. We're all there in this big field, and everybody can just have conversations. They can go learn things. They can ask questions. It is a wonderful experience, and it takes place July 11th through the 14th down in Van Hoy Farms, Union Grove, North Carolina. And I would love for you to join me there. The Gay with God podcast will be live streamed from there, and we are going to have a live guest, and then I'll be able to post it later here. But you can be right there, and I'm not the only podcaster. I am one of a group of podcasters that are Wild Goose podcasters, and we love coming together every year, and we love new people that are joining the group of podcasters. So please come if you can, and as a thank you, Wild Goose has given me the right to invite you to have a discount code. So on the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com, find this episode and scroll down to the bottom, and I have the code listed there. You can get $50 off of a weekend adult ticket. So please come and join us and be inspired. Be inspired to go back to your communities and do what you got to do to get people to know that we are not just going to go quietly. We are not going to have our rights taken away. We can be led by Jesus's example of how to do some social justice because he never backed down. Somebody asked me that question yesterday, what would Jesus do during this political climate? And I said, well, what he wouldn't do is stay silent. He always spoke up when there was injustice against women, against lepers, against people in general, and he opened his ministry up to include everybody. He didn't just preach to the Jews, although that's who he first started talking to, was his community, but then he branched out. And so I kind of think that with this Gay with God podcast, my whole intention was to be able to give people hope and to give people the permission to look at their life and how their life has transpired since all of the religious trauma that many of us experienced. What happened to your faith journey? Where did you land? Are you still struggling to come out and kind of combine your faith and your authenticity? That was my whole goal with this podcast, with the book, with my memoir. Everything was for another way for people to see that they have the right to be who they are, to be authentic, to live their life as they have been created to live it, and still have the relationship with the God of your understanding. And that's our whole purpose. So I appreciate those of you who are faithful listeners. I appreciate you for continuing to let other people hear about the podcast and share in the joy that you have in knowing that you are beloved by God. Always have been, always will be, and you can have the relationship with the God of your understanding that you want to have. So, having said all of that, here's a little update. So, I went to see my family yesterday for Mother's Day. My mom is 89 years old. She will be turning 90 in July, and she's tired. She's got some health issues. Um, she's living with my sister, who has chosen to take her in and take care of her and be her support system. And I'm so grateful to her for doing that. There are many things that I'm called to do, but I'm definitely not called to be an accountant. And we've talked about this before, and my friend Tracy will laugh at me for that, but she knows that I should never be an accountant. The other thing that I will not be and am not called to be is anything in the nursing field. I am not a caretaker. I do panic when there's a health related risk of some kind. I don't know what to do. I can get people involved to help with that. I have taken, the life-saving courses, but I am not called to that. I'm not called to be um, a caretaker in that respect because I just don't know what to do, and it's just not in my wheelhouse. And I don't beat myself up about that. I know who I am. I know where my strengths are. And if I have to do certain things, I mean, I have helped my wife before when she's been injured or when she needed something, and I can step up in a very brief, very time limited way. But I do give my sister a whole lot of credit for the loving gift that she's giving to our mom during her last few years. So going down for Mother's Day is an opportunity to look back at our lives and our relationships, and especially for Mother's Day, your relationship with your mom. And so, if you've read my memoir, you know that I give a whole section, a whole chapter to my mother and to my dad, and I talk about my family and I talk about the experiences that I had growing up and how that impacted me spiritually, how that impacted how long it was that it took me to come out. And we explore a lot of topics in the memoir. And most recently, I have done a Gay with God book club online for those folks who had pre-ordered the book, who had supported me throughout the entire writing experience. I had the Ask Me Anything groups where people could meet with me once a month and I would update them on the progress of the book and talk about some of the struggles, and we would talk about some of the things I was writing. I would give them some sneak peeks into what was going to be in the memoir and read some of the things that I had generated, not knowing if it would actually make it in the book or wouldn't be in the book, but they got a chance to hear it. Even if it didn't get in the book, they then heard some snippets of some unpublished stories that I had written. So, the book club, and the reason I'm doing this particular episode on the Gay with God book club is because we are winding down on this first group. And I'm very excited to have those folks be a part of this. And we have really enjoyed meeting together, and I've enjoyed it, I think, as much as they did. They loved being able to hear some of the backstories of something that was in the book, and they'd say, well, I had this question after you wrote that, and then I wanted to know this. How did you, or when did you, or what did you? And I love answering those questions. And I shared some pictures with them over Zoom, and it just was a delightful experience for me. And I appreciated their interest, and I appreciated their comments and their thoughtful questions. So we have one more session in this first group of people. And if you have already gotten the memoir and you've read it, perfect. If you want to be in the book club, that meets online with me. I would love to have you join me for that. And so I'm going to explore a little bit about what that's like today. And I also would want you to, you don't have to have read the book ahead of time, but we'll like always talk about what chapters are going to come up next. In this particular group, because it was a while before I could start the group, they had all read the book. So we did divide it up into what chapters we were going to talk about, and we usually took one or two at a time. Um, so it doesn't really matter. You could have read the book, or you could be in the process of reading the book, and it still would be okay either way. Um, but of course, you will have to have the book in order to know what we're talking about. So the first thing I usually do is I get folks together and we talk about just what came up for you. You know, when in this chapter, how did you feel about it? What were some of the things that you experienced, you know, reading it? What questions do you have? And then there were sometimes things that I specifically had chosen that I wanted to go into a little bit more detail about, and then maybe give something away that wasn't in the book, like a picture of a real person. The names in my memoir were changed. I didn't want any of my family to be uh, exposed to any kind of, I don't know what, notoriety or whatever. I didn't want them to be named in the book. And when I did ask my siblings if they wanted to be named, they both liked the idea of having a name that wasn't their birth name, and they got to choose their own name. So that's a fun little fact that I didn't just make up their names. I did some of them, some of the extended people I did, but for my siblings, I just called my mama mama, and for my siblings, I let them pick their own name. The only person, I guess the two people that I kept the name that I would have called them was Father Joe Mitchell, who was extremely important in this whole experience of me coming back to church and reclaiming my faith, and Mom Flynn, who was the dietitian, the cook, the general over the cafeteria at college at Berkshire Christian College, and she was always just referred to as Mom Flynn. And if she liked you, you were in, but she was still rough. She would call you out on things. She would glare at you, but she would love you all through the time that we were together. I was there for 4 years and I worked for her for 4 years, and I was devastated when I had to leave college, and I just loved her so much. So Mom Flynn does protect her anonymity. She has now uh, is now deceased, but she was always called that. Everybody will know that that's who I'm referring to, but her actual given name is not listed in the book. So the book has four different sections to it. And I did that so I could kind of chop up my life in some respect. And so the first part of the book includes my family. And we talk about my mom and my daddy, me coming into the world, talk about my sister, my brother, and my parents as a couple. The second part of the book is called Trials. And in that section, I talk about my trial of really trying to be a Christian and avoid hell. That was the way I was taught, and the religious trauma that I have in me. It was all about me trying to be exactly what I thought I was supposed to be in order to get to heaven and avoid hell. And so the chapters are Jesus Facade, Testing the Call, The Slough of Despond. Boy, that's a good one. The Land of Contrast, Dysentery and Homesickness. This was my India trip. The eggs fell out of the basket. That's not literal, that's figuratively, because I was single focused. I was going to go be a missionary. I was going to, do this in order to get to heaven, I think. And then Berkshire Christian College, and then my first major crush at the Christian college. Now, did I know it? Absolutely not, but that's another whole story. Part three is searching. I talk about the wild haired boy. He is an amazing little kid, and I think about him so often. I'm telling you, that was a time where I was doing substitute teaching, and I had a classroom of second graders that I was able to work with for like several months because the teacher had gone out on pregnancy leave, and I took over for the last part of the year. And this is where I met this little wild-haired boy, and he changed my life. The love story begins. I get to college and to graduate school, and I meet the love of my life. And it talks about broken trust because I about screwed up the whole thing. I really did. I made a decision and I did something, and I did it out of love, and it pretty much just blew up in my face. The graduate record exam that I failed and still was able to get into graduate school and stay, that's another whole story. My life emerging, and then my blessed Danny, DANI, my very first official, my dog, Danny, a Labrador Retriever that had a beautiful red coat. Her, um, she had chocolate and yellow and black lab in her uh, history, and she came out this beautiful red color, and she was amazing. But she created a tornado in our apartment that we lived in up in graduate school, and that's a great story. And then part four is all about life after graduate school. So I did meet the love of my life, but we had to separate after graduate school. And spoiler alert, I wasn't out yet. So I take you through 7 years of confusion, and then out of the darkness, chapter 24 is I died at 30, at age 30. I can't wait for you to see how that unfolds, and reclaiming my faith. So I love this memoir because, not just because it's mine and because I wrote it, but I love this memoir because I've heard from people who have read it who have said, I never thought that I could be gay with God. And the same thing with this podcast. I've had people, talk about, I heard the podcast, or somebody said, I read your book and I feel so much different now about my own family, or I feel so much different about me and how I fit in the world. And people are giving me the feedback that I wanted. I wanted people to be able to make their own choice. I wanted people who have felt suicidal because of the religious trauma and the social stuff that we have to go through, and how marginalized people in the LGBTQ plus community have always been blamed for everything, and yet we are still God's beloved, and we haven't caused the wars or the floods or the pandemic. We really are not that powerful, people. We haven't done those things, but everybody seems to target us when it comes down to something, instead of, understanding that we are gay with God. Whether you have that as your predominant faith, if you don't believe in God, if you call God another name, which I did for years, always called God the creator of all that is, because I believe that something more intelligent than just two rocks clacking together did all of this. So I believe that, but I couldn't use the word God because it was so damning to me. That feeling of the abomination word that keeps being dropped right after you hear the word God in the Bible. And I finally was able to say the word God once I understood that I was not condemned, that the scriptures in the Bible don't say what it was originally in the Greek supposed to say. It wasn't about same sex, loving, committed relationships. It was about the perversion of sex. It was about the domination of sex. It was about, taking advantage of somebody, raping somebody. It was not same sex attraction and the authentic nature that we were created to be. When I get that message out, I feel I'm on my purpose, and I was called to do this podcast. I was called to write this memoir. I'm called to speak up about social justice. And I feel out of sorts when I'm not doing this. People ask me all the time, how can you do that, all the time. And it's because it's my passion. It is something that I get great joy doing. I love talking about being able to reclaim my faith because I felt it was stolen from me. And so if I can reclaim my faith, I love doing that. If I can talk to somebody else about how they can reclaim their faith, I love that. If I'm talking about honoring my story, it's because each of us deserves to look back at our story with all of the warts and the bumps and the bruises and everything we've been through. We look back at our story and we can honor it because we went through tough stuff and we're still here. We can honor our stories because those nicks and bumps and warts and bruises crafted us into who we are, the resilient, authentic, amazing people that were created to be exactly who we are created to be. And so this book, my memoir, is not only a badge of courage and honor for me, it is also you. However you identify with this story, and many people have told me that they have identified with this story. They might not have lived in my family, but they lived in their family and they went through stuff. And it doesn't have to be the exact same stuff, but it is always your own authentic journey. And we can see each other and lift each other up through our own journeys because we know what it feels like to be disinherited, to be kicked out of churches, to lose friends, to have all of these things happen when we just speak the truth. So it doesn't matter if your story is exactly like mine, but this memoir is maybe not for you, but it might be for somebody that you know. So if you have gotten the memoir already, if you have read it, if you have extra questions about, well, why did she write that? Or why didn't she do it this way? Or what was that about? Why didn't she finish that story? Well, let me just give you the other spoiler alert if you haven't seen all of the updates to the memoir. I hadn't written chapter 4 yet, and I was already at 98,000 plus words because I was purging my own emotional baggage into this book before I had it re-edited, and I took out a bunch of stuff that just didn't need to be in there. So there's a lot of things that, are not in the book, but it would have been, and I might have not fleshed it out exactly in some of those instances because it got into the weeds and I didn't need all of that, and I couldn't publish a book that was over 98,000 words, one you would never choose to buy a book that would be that expensive, and I wanted people to have it affordable. And I did have to have a discussion, with my person that was helping me get all the marketing set up, like how much is it going to be and all this kind of stuff. And they wanted me to charge a little bit more for the book because I would be able to make more back in royalties, but I wasn't comfortable with that. I was comfortable with making more in royalties, don't get me wrong. If I'm going to get paid for something I've done, I'm really excited about that. But I'm not going to make it too expensive because I didn't want you to have that as a barrier for you. So I did try to get, it priced in a way that anybody could afford it, especially if you do the Kindle and it's like under $10. I wanted it to be affordable and I wanted it to be something that you could do or that you could gift to somebody else. So the memoir, Gay with God, Reclaiming My Faith, Honoring My Story, is opening up a new book club soon. And I'm so excited about that. If you are interested in being a part of the book club, please email me at empoweredmidge@gmail.com. That's empoweredmidge@gmail.com, all lowercase. And just in the subject, put book club or Gay with God book club, and I'll know that you're writing me about that. And I will make sure that you get invited to the book club when I start it. It's usually on Thursdays at 6:30 in the evening, Eastern Standard Time. But if we have a whole new group of people and that time doesn't work for any of you, then I will work with you and I will find a different time. So everybody may not be pleased, but hopefully everybody will be pleased, and we will find the right time for all of us. So if you're interested in being in the book club that's coming up, email me at empoweredmidge@gmail.com, and in the subject line, let's put Gay with God Book Club. Or you can put GWG if you're needing privacy and you don't want anybody to see that tag, just put GWG and I'll know what you're talking about. Book club. And then I'll give you an invite when I'm ready to start it. Okay, so wanted to give you one example of one of the questions that's in the back. Now, this first group, like I said, we didn't really go through these questions because they had other needs in mind, like they had inquiring minds had inquiring questions. But this last time that we get together, we're going to go through the epilogue, and they wanted to tell me the impact that the book had on them. So everybody's going to share about that. And then we're also going to glance over these questions and see if anybody has one of these questions in the back of the book that they wanted to explore more. So today, I thought that I would explore one with you. So one of the questions in the back of the book says that Midge was raised to believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God and that it can't be questioned. What beliefs about the Bible were you taught? Do these still ring true for you today? So, of course, then we would just talk about that. If we choose to go through the book club questions, we would take one each time and kind of talk about that. And for me, I will say that that was probably one of the hardest things I had to overcome as I was trying to reclaim my faith, is that questioning it was really made to be sinful, that you don't question. You just read it and you believe it, and it is exactly the way it was written. They never talked about, when was it written? What time period? What was going on then? In that particular passage, were any of those words in Greek actually able to be translated a different way? Who were the people that were being spoken to? What happened before? What happened after that passage? There's so much to go into looking at why was that written. All of the letters from Paul in the New Testament were written to specific churches. Why did Paul write those things to those churches? What were the issues in that church? Is that for all churches? You know, these questions that we unpack are really, really relevant, because you can't go through all of the translations from the beginning of the very first translation. You can't believe that not everybody had their own bias and everybody had their own opinion. So the Bible that we have today has already been questioned, has already been rewritten by people translating it the way they perceive it today. And actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because if you're translating it for a new day, so I believe God is still working. I believe God is still speaking to us and through us and around us. And I don't believe that the things that were being taught, for example, in Leviticus, the Puritan laws and the ways to keep people safe and clean, and the way to make sure that they don't die from the food that they're eating, all of that Levitical law stuff, is it relevant today? Of course not. How many of you are eating pigs and bacon and cattle and certain winged birds? And how many of you dress in lots of different fabrics and have tattoos and dye your hair and have piercings? Listen, there are Christians out there that hold us accountable for a very narrow amount of understanding about the word homosexuality in the Bible, which wasn't there until 1946. Watch the movie. Anyway, um, and yet they don't hold themselves accountable for anything in the Levitical laws. So it is okay to question, and it is okay to open our minds and say, what is God saying to us today? And how is that relevant? The other thing about that struggle for me is that I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to err on the side of, the lake of fire. And so I was afraid to question, and I really didn't understand that it wasn't inspired and that every black, white, and red word in the Bible is somebody else's interpretation of what that was written down to be. And the way they divide the chapters, the way they divide and head different sections, that wouldn't have been in the original text. They didn't have chapters in the things that they wrote. They didn't have headings. Okay, so the original text is way, way different than what we're reading in the Bible translations today. The last part of that question is, what beliefs about the Bible were you taught? And I was taught that it was inspired, it's literal, and that what it says is what it means. And do these still ring true for you today? No. Now, it rings true to me today that Jesus is the Messiah and that Jesus was a prophet and human and divine. I believe those things. I believe in the resurrection. I believe in his crucifixion. I believe in the broad understanding of how to be in relationship with Jesus, walk and talk the way Jesus walked and talked, which would be walking in love and compassion and inclusion and speaking up against abuse and mistreatment of people who are marginalized. What I disagree with is that when people equate us with sinners, not that we don't all sin, by the way, we all miss the mark. None of us are perfect. But they kind of lump us together like when they're trying to be our ally and they say, well, of course he loves gay people because he sat with the murderers and perverts, and they go through this whole list of things. And I'm like, wait a minute. Jesus did not sit with us because we were in some way deviant. He sat with us and he loves us because we are created to be who we are. And he also has compassion for people who have missed the mark. Now, I do understand that, but homosexuality is not missing the mark, my friends. Homosexuality, identifying as lesbian, gay, transsexual, pansexual, whatever you identify as, that is who you are created to be. That's not something that you've done. So if I've murdered somebody, that's something that I've done, and I've clearly missed the mark on not killing people. Being gay is not in the list of commandments. So it is not that he sat with us because we are sinning from homosexuality. He sits with all sinners because we all do miss the mark. And he also sits with the people who are being excluded, the people that are being unloved, the people that are not being taken care of when we were commanded to take care of all of each other. So that's the thing I really, really disagree with. And of course, because homosexuality in the condemning way was translated into the Bible incorrectly in 1946, I do not believe that homosexuality is an abomination to his Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. I believe that we can be gay with God and the God of our understanding, and we are included and we are beloved. We always have been, we always will be. So thank you everybody for sharing this time with me. I appreciate you so very, very much. Please let people know about this podcast. Please let people know if you've read the memoir, Gay with God, Reclaiming My Faith, Honoring My Story. Please do a review on Amazon. Let's get some more visibility up there. And please share it with friends of yours. Let them know about it. Let them know about this book club. Maybe you and some of your friends would like to all come together. That would be brilliant. I would love that. So please go to empoweredmidge@gmail.com and sign up for that next book club. And if you want to learn more about me, how to connect with me, if you need any assistance with your coming out journey, if you need any assistance with reclaiming your faith, you can sign up for a confidential and complimentary, that means free, complimentary session just to see if we're a good match. So you can go to empoweredmidge.podbean.com to the show page and see all of my information. You can connect with me on my website, gaywithgod.com, and I would love for you to see all the things that I've offered there. Also on Facebook, you can check out the group that I run called Gay with God, where we do a monthly Zoom group entitled My Faith Journey. We delve into different topics, and we also just check in with each other and see how things are going, how are we feeling, do we need support, and then we usually do something that piques our interest. It might be something I've read and I bring it to the group. It might be a certain passage that somebody wants to explore a little bit more. So anything that comes up for us, and we can bring it to the My Faith Journey group, and we are supportive of each other there. If you are listening to this podcast and are questioning whether you can be gay and be in relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as LGBTQIA+, are not even sure if you are gay, God has always been with you and within you. Even when you didn't know it, you have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned to see how you can join the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.